Welcome back to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Back by popular demand, we have with us today Tom Stimson, and he is joining us to discuss the state of the industry. And for those of you that do not know Tom Stimson, if that's even possible, Tom is a business advisor, author, coach, and speaker who works exclusively with hands-on owners and management teams in the events industry. And he helps them do things like improving their decision-making and elevating their strategic thinking. He's also spent over 40 years in the professional event industry. So clearly he's seen a few things, which is why we always love having him on the show because he's got a lot of good insight. So thank you, Tom, for joining us again.
Well, thank you. My demanding to get back on the show has paid off. Thank you for having me.
Hardly. We always love having you. It's always great to have you because I feel like every time you and I get together, it always gets my brain moving and gets me thinking about things differently. So it's really fun to have you back and just kind of have a casual conversation about what's going on.
Let's wind each other up.
Let's do it. Well, we did our annual State of the Industry report where we survey industry leaders on just kind of how they're feeling about things, what they're doing, what's changing in their business. But before we dive into some of those learnings, would love to hear from you. Like, how would you describe the state of our industry right now?
It's interesting right now because we're at, I'm starting to see that fear and trepidation kind of creep back in, that insecurity, because, we've had, so many years of not really knowing what was going to happen next. And now we know what's going to happen next, and we weren't really ready for it. So, as, supplies are creeping back up, we've got more freelancers available. We can do bigger shows. We can buy equipment again. We can sub-rent. And demand has kind of leveled off. So while our demand is still more than supply, right, it's getting closer together. So it's like, well, it's not as easy to sell right now. And customers don't need to shop around quite so much because, well, there's supply there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, we're not, it's not 10 companies getting a crack at a job anymore. It's like one or two. And, people are having to remember how to sell. So this has been an interesting time. I'd say the questions that I get go through phases, but I think since the beginning of the year, 90% of queries coming to me have been about selling questions, about selling.
Well, there is a stat in here we're going to talk about in just a minute. I'll leave a little cliffhanger here because it blew me away, the answer. And quite honestly, I'm not sure if I believe it. So we're going to get to that in just a little bit when it comes to selling. But let's start with labor outsourcing. One of the questions we asked was, how much of your labor and talent are you still outsourcing? And over half of the respondents said that they're outsourcing less than 1/4 of their labor. And so just kind of curious, it feels like the pendulum is kind of swung when it comes to talent and labor. Companies seem to be hiring more full-time employees. Even though supply has increased, they're hiring more full-time. So it's just kind of curious, is that what you're seeing too? And are you still a proponent of outsourcing versus kind of hiring full-time?
That number shocked me as well. One, I don't think everybody really understands the question. I think that's always part of it.
Yeah.
And you don't always know who the mix is, but no, that's not what I'm seeing, because if you were my client, would you tell me that you were hiring more technicians? Right. I'm coming through the screen at them. So it is a little shocking to see that we would resort to hiring people full time, increasing our internal supply and raising our overhead just because it's easier than booking a freelancer. And that's often what it is. And then when I do occasionally get people who are thinking that we need to do this, it's first and foremost, it's convenience. That's that security that we have people available, that we can control their schedule and do these last minute jobs, even though they booked them on gigs 10 weeks ago. Right. But it's also because, well, freelancers are so expensive. I'm going, compared to what? Well, compared to my employee, really? Can we do the math? Let's stop for a moment and do the math. So I think it's a false economy. I do think, particularly in smaller companies who rarely get beyond their capacity, having a couple of technicians on staff is going to make sense. It's really hard for me to talk them off of that because they have enough work to keep them busy. But adding technicians does not increase capacity.
Well, my hope is people aren't kind of returning to some of that, you know, security blanket, right, of just having them there just in case and making some of those bad decisions. That's my hope. I guess that's to be seen.
I hope so too. I mean, look, you look at where we were in 2019, oversupply on talent, oversupply on equipment, you know, margins were wafer thin. And the one thing you don't want to add is overhead and people,
Yeah.
when what you need is to make sure that the team you have is being used effectively so that you could outsource in advance. As an old freelancer, I still don't understand why people have an issue with freelance technicians, but everybody's got that story about that one person they hired who didn't work out that one time.
Well, there's always that one. You're right.
There's always that one, and that
No
they move from job to job and change their name, right?
Yeah,
But
that's right.
yeah, so that was a little bit disturbing to me,
Yeah.
that people think that we can slide back, that the problem's solved, and in fact, it's not.
Well, speaking of freelancers, let's talk about pay rates. So the next question we asked was, have companies made a significant increase in how they're paying their freelancers? And our survey said that 44% said that they had made a significant increase in pay rates, which to me is encouraging. And that's compared to 29% last year had only reported a significant pay increase. So my question is, do you think now that they're increasing pay rates, are you seeing them also increase their bill rates? Because I think that's been a lost opportunity in the past too.
We have seen them increase their bill rates, and I've been banging that tambourine as loud as I can to say, guys, we've got to get rates normalized. We've been subsidizing our equipment prices with low labor rates, because God, we can't discount labor. Everybody knows that that's the cardinal rule. You can't discount labor, except we have been. And we do it a number of ways. We do one by keeping our labor rates low and trying to keep our equipment profit high, which is a false economy. We do it by shortchanging the job on the number of technicians that we actually need, because we're trying to save the client money, and doubling up and tripling up on positions. So just getting people to understand that we didn't start paying freelancers more. Freelancers started insisting on what they're worth.
It's a good point. It's a good
Right. So it's like, I never tell, and I tell my clients this. I said, and most of my old clients all know this. You don't tell a freelancer what their rate is. When you do, they're no longer a freelancer. You know, you ask them what their rate is, and you can choose to hire them or not. And when you're desperate, you're going to get freelancers who are asking a rate that's above what they're worth, and that's caveat emptor. Right? That's why we need to be better at buying. And the fact is, as the market has come back, as the freelancers have reemerged or left that staff job, which, either you're a good staff person, you're a good freelancer, you're rarely both, they can get a better rate. So if we want good freelancers, we're going to have to pay for it.
Well, you mentioned getting better at buying. What other areas do you think companies have an opportunity to get better at buying?
They need to get better at buying across the board. If you don't know what your costs are, how in the world are you quoting jobs? So very typically I'll hear, well, we quoted airfare of $350 a ticket. Where'd you get that number from? Well, it's either that's what we've always done, or that's what it costs me to get from Des Moines to Kansas City. I'm going, well, what's that have to do with anything? So we don't understand what our costs are. So we make up costs, and then we try and manage the job to the made up cost. And we do that with labor rates, right? I quoted $500 a day for camera operators. I can't find anybody for less than $600.
Yeah.
Well, hello.
Even with the gear, people they're forgetting to include their carrying cost, right? Like their insurance and all the other things they carry on it. So they just assume, they're incorrectly calculating their cost, which to your point means it's translating into not doing a good job.
Oh, well, I can get that locally. Well, great. Did you cost the van to run over there and pick it up and then return it again? I mean, we don't think all of these things through, and we feel guilty about markup, right? So if we outsource something, we are marking it up, which is not true at all. You're just doing business. So there's a lot of self-talk that keeps us in this spiral of mispricing things. But if you don't understand your costs, you're going to sell it incorrectly, and you're going to back yourself into a corner and try and fulfill it incorrectly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, you just mentioned 2 things. You said talked about, well, we're estimating travels at 350 and, people forgetting to talk about, shipping the gear, whether it's cross town, cross country, whatever it might be. So let's kind of dive into 2 of those stats. When it comes to travel, 34% of companies reported traveling their crew all the time. So my question is, are you surprised by that? 34% say they're traveling their crew all the time.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I thought that was a very high number, and maybe it's just the people who, respond to this poll. And so, I feel like you're Jen Psaki right now. You're pulling stats out on me and throwing me these questions, and I can't defend that. I don't know that number. That seems like a high number to me because, there are 20,000 companies in North America who are qualified to fill out that survey. And I don't think there's, 6,000 companies out there that are traveling crew.
Yeah. Yeah. When I also think about like, what does traveling crew mean to them, right? Is it just their leads? It also depends on, are they doing national shows? Are they more regional? And, I do think there's some of those things.
In Texas, our idea of region is much larger. We consider, from Dallas to Houston, it's a 4.5 hour drive, 5 hours in a truck, and we consider that a local show. So, but if you drive 5 hours from Philadelphia, you could be in Ohio, right? So it's like, it's a different concept of travel. But I think, traveling people all the time, meaning that you have people out of town every week versus all of my people travel every week. And the response to me says, these people think all of their people travel every week. And I don't think that's possible because they couldn't get any jobs done.
Yeah, no, I think this was, on rosters, how many of your kind of events are you doing? Are you often traveling crew versus, maybe, and maybe, right, it could just be, your lead audio engineer, your lead video engineer, right? Or the producer that you're traveling, right? That's still somebody that you're traveling. But do you have any thoughts on how to balance when to travel somebody in versus when to invest in building your bench in these other markets so you don't have to?
Why do we have people on staff? We have people on staff because we want their intellect, we want their skills and experience, we want them on all of our jobs. So when we take our staff people and we dedicate them to a specific job and fly them across the country, that says we don't know how to get shows done. We know how to do shows because we have this person on staff, right? To me, it sends a horrible message to the client. If I'm doing a show across country, I should send one person. I mean, if you got a show in California, there's no reason to travel anybody in, right? The freelancers in California could crew every show in the country.
From our purview, what we see, we do see a lot of, we call it travel abuse, where it's kind of like, hey, why are you flying 60% of your roster cross country in a market, to your point, whether it's California, Orlando, Dallas, right? There is no shortage of supply in those markets, right? And it's not a heavy lift to kind of build the bench or access talent in those markets.
And there's different philosophies out there. The company I used to work for, we had freelance technicians all over the country. So we would put the right crew together for every show, and we were very geographically agnostic. Right. So then we'd get the people. Now, we were sensitive. We didn't want to fly the people from Seattle to Boston if we could avoid it.
Yeah.
Right. That would get kicked out. But if we're doing a show in Chicago, everybody was fair game.
Yeah.
So, but that's not a majority of our industry. That's a very small select of companies. There's probably maybe 100 companies in all North America that are in a position of doing that.
Yeah,
that's true. So it's probably really the false economy that I have these people on staff, or my freelancers are less expensive. And then there's my freelancers know our gear better.
Yeah. I have to have these 5 people. I have to. Yeah.
Right. Because you don't actually know how to get shows done. You only know how to do shows. It only under the set of controlled parameters of my equipment and my people.
Right. So let's shift gears and talk about kind of budgeting and planning. 43% of companies said they are planning to purchase more gear in 24 than they did in 23. So what are you seeing when it comes to advancements in equipment, technology, all those sorts of things that kind of driving this increase in the investment there?
I am not the technology guru that I would have been, 20 years ago. But what I am seeing is, one, just stuff wearing out. We didn't buy a lot of stuff through the pandemic, so a lot of people are using the projectors that they bought in 2018, and they're tired. They need to go away. They needed to convert it to laser already, whatever that might be. So we're seeing a little bit of that catch-up work. We're also figuring out that that $150,000 video switcher that we thought we couldn't do a show without has been replaced by a $15,000 switcher that does more and takes up a tenth of the space, and everybody knows how to use. So how do I get one of those? So yeah, they're buying more gear. I think they're spending less money to do it.
Well, yeah, and especially with interest rates. I mean, are you still, is anybody talking about interest rates in the conversations that you're having, how it's impacting their buying?
And with all due respect to any economist who might be listening, everybody talks about interest rates. Nobody knows what it actually means. So people complain. Well, they complain about the interest rates. I'm going, what's the interest rate? Well, I don't know. They're just too high. It's like people in my generation started companies in 1990 with credit cards at 18 to 21% interest. My home mortgage was 9.5%. What do you care if your bank loan goes from 5.5 to 5.75? Why is that?
But you don't think that the lines of credit that these companies carry or the interest rates, I mean, they've gone from more than 5.5 to 5.75. Do you see it? You don't see it having any sort of negative impact? And it's okay if you don't. I'm just kind of curious.
If you are not credit worthy, it is harder to get credit, and credit is going to be more expensive. Now, if you've not been in business long enough for your bank to give you a signature loan for $600,000, okay, be in business longer. But the fact is, there's nothing keeping you from buying new equipment. It's not the interest rates, because the carrying cost of the equipment includes
those that are categorized that way, right? And that's where I think a lot of people are forgetting to include the carrying costs, right, in their gear. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things. It's like the price of milk. We get hung up on it.
Yeah.
But does it really factor in? When in fact, what you're hearing is your bank saying, well, I can't give you that rate.
Yeah.
I can give you this rate, and they're seeing the delta.
And they're even being more strict with even granting the loans. So we've seen a big kind of pullback from that as well.
Right. Which is an indication to me that we have to do a better job of making our businesses look viable.
Instead of spending 50, you can do just as much with 15, right? You don't have to have the $50,000.
And if you're not walking into the bank with financials that says you're throwing out 25, 30% a year, like all of the other people coming to them for loans, why are they going to give you a better deal? So you can continue to make 6 or 7%, which seems insane to them because you're buying high technology and flying people across the country. That's a very high risk business at a very, very low margin. So people on the outside look at us and going, you people are crazy. Why don't you buy an ice cream stand? They make more money. They only have to work 6 months out of the year.
Crazy for a number of reasons.
But we love it. It's what we do. And my mission is to get people to do it in a viable business fashion. We shouldn't have to pay to be in the industry that we're in. Given what we do and how complex and valuable it is, we shouldn't have to.
Well, speaking of that specifically and cash flow, we asked, this one's always interesting to me. We asked about who collects a deposit on their shows. I don't know if I believe this one either, but 40%, although maybe I do, because when we talk to some of our customers, some of them, we ask them that, but 40% are still not collecting a deposit. Why?
One, I don't think they know how to. I don't think they just don't have the mechanism for it. It's like, oh, they would, if there's a deposit, it'll be on a credit card, and then we'll have to pay credit card fees. So that's just mechanism. Now, they get hung up on the interest rate, right? They get hung up on the fee. But the fact is, they're not willing to put the mechanism. So it doesn't surprise me that 40% don't collect deposits.
It's more trouble to collect a deposit than to tap into your line of credit and cash flow and all the other things, right? Because they're having to give deposits if they sub-rent or.
People forget that. That's often one of those things that, you'll point out to them and saying, well, really, your client paid a deposit to the hotel to book the event, the show there. Well, our client won't pay us a deposit. Really, they paid 7 deposits before they even talk to you. So I think part of it is we still 40% of our
Yeah.
people are still probably pretty analog in how they do business. And getting a deposit means an accountant or bookkeeper has got to generate an invoice. They have to post it as a deposit,
Yeah.
which is unearned revenue, and it goes in a different place. And the client's going to pay us whenever they're going to pay us anyway. And we don't have a problem with collections, but it took them 10 years to get
Yeah.
into a point where the cash flow allowed them to not take deposits. And meanwhile, you've got all this working capital in the business that
Yeah.
could have bought you that boat that you've
Yeah.
always wanted, which is where it should be. So I think a lot of it is just helping people understand that there are mechanisms for doing that.
I think that's a great takeaway, right? They're expecting for you to charge them a deposit and to collect it. They're expecting that. So, missed opportunity.
Yeah. And the trick here is don't make it
Yeah.
look arbitrary. 50% is an arbitrary deposit. You say, and I said, don't, well, first of all, if you call it a deposit, you've lost. If you call it a deposit, that means you're going to give it back if something goes wrong. You charge them a reservation fee, right? So we got to change our understanding of what that money is doing. The money, a deposit just means you're going to help me with my cash flow. Thank you.
So I want us to do another episode one day about nomenclature, right? It's talent versus labor. It's a reservation fee versus a deposit. There's so many different things. It's nuanced, right? A discount and what that means and how that looks on, like why do we give discounts? There's so many different ways we're going to do that another time. I'm going to have you back again because I think there's so much there and just the nomenclature of how we talk about things in our proposals and in our quotes and how we position it. Lots of opportunity with just a few small tweaks, which when we talked about proposals, I know you've got Jumpstart coming up, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit in April, where you're going to be teaching companies how to sell, the value of the proposal and quoting, and how you should position yourselves better to win more business. But 79% of companies reported that they win at least half the business they quote, which that's phenomenal. If they're winning at least half the business they're quoting, I don't know if that goes back to kind of what you were saying earlier with the supply and demand, but do you see companies winning that often?
I actually see companies that are winning 70, 80, 90% of business. So if you're winning half the business, that's one problem. If you're winning 90%, that's another problem. Those are both the wrong number. Right. Right. So if you're only winning half the things, why did you quote on the other half? What is it you don't understand about your position in the marketplace that you're only winning half the things that you went to the trouble and expense of quoting? So to me, that's a huge
It's also winning the right
sales
type of
management
business.
issue. If you're winning 90%, right. If you can get, I have a client who 90% of what he quotes, he does, but he actually doesn't write a proposal. He only writes agreements. And 10% of the agreements don't happen because the client changed the gig or canceled the job. It's not because he didn't win. So 50% though is a concerning number. Those people need to wake up and take a hard look at what they're doing because the cost of selling is high.
Yeah. All the
Half their
time that
selling
goes
expense
into
was
these
wasted.
pitches and proposals. And I know it's different. Sometimes, it might just warrant a quote, right? Depending on
Yeah.
what type of event it is. Whereas others, it does kind of warrant a full pitch, a full proposal, full storytelling.
But the people who write tons of quotes will tell you it takes just as much time to write a $2,500 quote as it does a $10 or $15 or $30,000 quote. As a matter of fact, that $1,500 quote took 5 phone calls. The $30,000 quote took 3. So every quote is a valuable use of resources. And writing quotes that you're not going to win when all you had to say, it's going to be about $2,000. Is that going to work for you? Oh, no, we don't have that kind of money. Well, tell me what you have. Well, we only have $500. Great. Here's who you call. We could give phone numbers and instead of writing quotes and make more
Back to
money.
and yet we need more full-time staff. So it all comes full circle, right? All right, let's talk about the future and optimism. This is always a fun one. 76% of respondents expressed very high optimism for 2024. Do you think, from what you see, certain sectors of our industry should be more optimistic than others? Are you seeing more growth in certain areas than others? So just kind of curious what you're seeing.
I like that number. I think everybody should be optimistic. There's so many reasons to be optimistic. The opportunity, there's a lot of room for people who are willing to work on their business to have a much better year 24 and beyond, right? The path to success has never been more clear. We were swinging in the dark before the pandemic, and lucky sometimes we hit something. Sometimes we hit ourselves. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to be optimistic, but if we're chasing revenue and not looking at revenue strategically, there's probably some fear and trepidation in there because we don't know what we're swinging at. That's why we're writing so many quotes, hoping that something lands, because we're dialing for dollars. So 74% sounds optimistic to me because I think people are seeing the opportunities. The question is, are they capitalizing on the right opportunities? Are they getting the right results?
I don't know, the evolution and the innovation in our industry. I think our industry has a lot of good things going for itself, which is exciting.
I've been doing some reminiscing podcasts where I go back in time and say, here's the thing that happened to us, and this is why we do things now. But here's the point that happened, so that people can see the connection to those things. Because in 10 and 20 years from now, we're going to look back at these moments and going, what changed, and why the heck didn't it change sooner?
Well, we asked people what was top of mind for 2024. And the two biggest things they mentioned, no surprise, people and processes are top of mind, specifically around the executive leadership teams within these companies. But what big changes did our industry make last year when it comes to people and processes in the companies that you saw? What were some of those big changes?
Some of the changes I saw, well, we're both software platform people, is I'm seeing a reduction in the number of platforms that we're using to get the work done, which is great. That means that we're thinking more efficiently about what it is we're trying to do. We're not creating processes or adding people to fulfill processes as much. We're critically looking at what our processes are. How can we change them? And, I have a client who 2 years ago was running on 12 software platforms, and every one of them was vital in the process flow, and I had to review every single one of them. And they're down to 3 now, right? And it is a game changer because it's dramatically changed how many people he needs in his business to generate a successful pass through. Because we're not waiting for this to get entered here by this person, and then the org chart isn't built around the process points. We're going to get an order through the system, and here's the people that takes to do it. Oh, by the way, it's all on 3 platforms and everybody's on all 3.
Well, and the chances for mishap drop drastically when you've got 3 different places to do it versus 12. It's like, what is the source of truth?
Right. When we create process to fix a mistake that happened one time, and we complicate our process, then we make another mistake, and then we add a step. Oh, we need to put a person here because somebody needs to double check this. Well, what else are they going to do? Well, this is important. They can just do that. Right. And as we keep adding all these layers of complexity on there, and you get to the point where it's like, we can't get anything done without adding more people.
Yeah. I was going to say, and there we are. We're back to more people.
Back to more people. And so the question that I ask folks when they're going, well, I need to hire somebody in ops to do this. And I'm going, well, wait a minute, you're doing, $4 million worth of business. You already got 15 employees, which is more than enough to do what you're trying to do. Do we have the right people? Because I don't think the problem is your process. I don't think the problem is the people. You don't need to add more people. You need to fix your processes. Do you have the right people to fix your processes? And invariably, I said, if knowing everything that you need to do the next 90 days, all the jobs that are sold, the quotes you're going to generate, who are the 3 people besides yourself you need to run this business for 90 days? And they can always name those 3 people.
Well, it's a real skill set that stands out. Somebody who can really kind of see through the noise and say, it's all noise. We only need 20% of what we had. This is the fastest and best path to a good outcome. And I think that's a real skill set.
It is. And if those 3 people that person just named weren't being sent all over the country to do shows that they could have hired a freelancer to do, they can take care of all the business. And that's what my balance model, my scalability model is all about. You need half as many people. They just need to be twice as good. Well, you have the people, you just have them doing the wrong jobs.
Wrong things. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think is the biggest opportunity our industry has in 2024?
The biggest opportunity we have is to change the selling conversation. I think this is the most critical thing. We sold from fear for so many years. We rental speak is still pervasive in our industry. We still think we're a rental industry and not a service industry.
Mhm.
Matter of fact,
Are you still seeing that?
oh goodness, yes.
Interesting.
Oh yeah. It's pernicious. It hides.
Mhm.
People are so used to it being there.
Yeah.
I mean, just the simple thing of, if you look at somebody's proposal and the first thing they show is the sound system. Why? Because audio's first in the alphabet. So they show audio, then they show lighting, then they show video, and then they show labor, our favorite word, down there at the bottom. It's like that's that's a rental company,
Yeah.
right? So what's the value you're bringing to this job you're putting together? Well, it's about talent and intellect and
Yeah.
experience. And why aren't you leading with that? Well, they need to know what gear's going to be there. Isn't that? I mean, it's like,
Right.
so these are the things that we think it's about the gear. The gear is just a cost saving mechanism that you chose to buy,
Mm-hmm.
and you make a determine whether the return on investment for owning the equipment is better for you, and maintaining a warehouse and having the staff and doing the repairs is a better value for you than outsourcing.
Yeah.
And you just have to find your balance with what is right for your business model. But we have to stop selling like we're rental companies that add labor to a rental order. It's like going down to Home Depot. I need a rototiller and a lawnmower and a chainsaw. And, well, would you like somebody to come out and do your yard for you too? We'll add that on.
Mm-hmm.
We're still doing that with shows.
Yeah. So I know you're going to be diving into that in Jumpstart, which I love the topic of selling. I think our industry is hungry for some guidance around that. Because you're right, I do think people sell the stuff and not the experience or the outcome and the value that these companies bring to the table versus just the gear they bring to the table. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in Atlanta, April 3rd and 4th, and how people can sign up to learn more about it.
We are going to talk about selling, and we're going to talk about selling, not like many conferences where we talk about sales, right? So this is not about coaching salespeople on how to be salespeople. You're already salespeople. That's part of the problem. Selling, however, is what we do as a company. And selling starts with marketing, it's business development, it's project design, it's solutions, it's estimating. Oh, we might write a proposal, and then we might have an account to manage. So that traditional salesperson role is really the last step in the selling process to help carry that order through the system with that customer and retain that client. But that's where we're trying to put all of our energy. So we're throwing quotes out all the place, but we're not doing all the things that bring it together cohesively, so that when the customer looks at your proposal, they understand what they are getting rather than what you are providing. And the way we sell is, here's what we're going to provide.
They understand what they are getting and not what you are providing. That's such an important call out.
Yeah. And I mean, for years, I've called that, we need to sell the what, not the how. And so we see proposals. I see multi-million-dollar proposals that are built around how we're going to get this done. And you don't see enough of the language about what is this going to do for this buyer.
Yeah. I love that. So how can people learn more about your Jumpstart coming up in April?
They could wander over to my website at trstimson.com/jumpstart, or click the Jumpstart link on the homepage. Learn a bit about the event, the presenters, the agenda, and you can certainly book your team or as many folks as you want to send. The hotel link is there. We're at the Sterling Hotel in Atlanta, which is a lovely, lovely little space I'm happy we were able to secure. And get going, because we're going to run out of hotel rooms, and well, you got to book your travel, right?
Yep.
So,
well, LASSO has participated in Jumpstart for years, ever since we started LASSO, maybe even before we even had our first kind of MVP of the software, right? Just kind of learning. And your events are always so well attended by
LASSO came to Jumpstart when you were still in discovery phase for your product line. right? And talked to people and understood how the industry was worked. And, I'm back there, I was teaching, fundamentals. I was talking warehouse layout. People have been so thirsty for any knowledge, and it's not that I have the knowledge, it's that you're in a room with other people who have knowledge too.
Yeah.
So you say,
You always get a
"Do
great
you do that?"
room of people together who can talk to their peers about everything that you're kind of leading the discussion. And it's always just a great investment for our team as well. So I would encourage our listeners, if you've never been, make sure you go. It's a great 2 days.
Come meet the folks, come find your people, they're here. You don't get to see them every day. You don't go out to lunch with your competitor all the time. But you know what? You can come here and hang out and talk shop. It's a fun group of people. I just love watching people meet each other, share ideas, and expand their business.
Yep. Great event. Great event. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us today. I appreciate it. You always bring a great perspective, given all that you've seen. So thanks for spending your time with us. We appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for what you're doing for the industry. I love the surveys. I think people need to express themselves, and we need to, you know, we need to interpret the surveys and do something with the information, not just pat ourselves on the back for being part of the 49%.
That's right. That's right. Good stuff. Well,
Yeah,
thank you again for joining. Thank you all for listening. If
my
you like
pleasure.
what you hear, please hit subscribe. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io. Thanks, everybody.